Hello, everyone. I will use this opportunity to welcome you to this another ever webinar series for AFRINIC. Welcome, everyone. In the next 2 minutes, we shall begin. 2 to 5 minutes, we shall begin. Okay, so let's quickly dive in. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to welcome you to AFRINIC webinar series. The webinar series is a new event that we offer our community to discuss current and future landscapes of internet accessibility, robustness for digitization of Africa. We ensure that we have 2 webinars in a month. We engage participants in discussions around topical issues in African internet ecosystem. In this and subsequent webinars, we will see subject matter experts interacting on various topics that are in line with spurring digital growth. So before we begin, we'll endeavor us to kindly type in the chat section if you can hear me and where you're joining from. You kindly see the chat section, and so you just introduce yourself in the chat section where you're joining us from, and you can also state your name as well. So, my name is Adibowale Adiloju. I am the Senior Learning Experience Designer at AFRINIC, and I'll be the moderator for this section. I have here with me my colleague, Krishna. Krishna is a legal professional with a diverse background in both teaching and management. Krishna also earned his LLB from the University of Wolverhampton in United Kingdom in 2006. In 2008, he was called to the bar of England and Wales. In 2013, he was admitted to the Mauritian bar. And since then, he had appeared in various courts in Mauritius, including the district courts, intermediate courts, industrial courts, and Supreme Court, including the appeal division of the Supreme Court. From 2015 to 2018, Krishna served as a board member for the Dental Council of Mauritius, where he chaired the investigating committee and other subcommittees during his tenure. In 2018, he joined the Central Electricity Board, CEB, as a legal officer, and also served as a company secretary to both the CEB and its subsidiaries. He later joined AFRINIC in September 2019, where he currently holds the legal counsel position. So I will quickly hand over to Krishna, so he can begin because of time, so we can continue from there. So Krishna, you can have the floor. You may have the floor.
Thank you, Debo. Thank you again for this introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. It gives me real pleasure to be your presenter for today on this interesting topic about introducing the AFRINIC's governance model. I'm sure AFRINIC is not new to you. I'm sure also that we're going to have an interesting audience who's going to participate with us and make this webinar more interactive. Please be free if you have questions about the topic as we go through the slides. Please be free to send us your questions on the Q&A section, or if you are chatting, if you have comments about the topic, please be free to do so, and I will be happy to address your comments or your questions as we go along. Otherwise, I will make sure that we have some time left to attend to your questions at the end of this presentation. So, as we going by the topic, so the aim is for you to to have an understanding of the AFRINIC governance model. Just with my slide. Why is my slide not moving? I see my slide is not moving. Right, okay, that's okay. So the objective for today's presentation is clear and simple, for you to acquire a general understanding of the AFRINIC's governance model. And before we proceed, just one important note to bear in mind. I'm sure you may have queries, predetermined questions that you may have prepared already, but just bear in mind of the sub judice rule in case you have any questions regarding any of the ongoing cases relating to AFRINIC. So we will not be able to discuss the merits of any ongoing cases concerning AFRINIC because of the sub judice rule, but because obviously, in any event, this is not the purpose of the webinar. The webinar is for you to acquire a general understanding of the AFRINIC's governance model. So talking about the AFRINIC's governance model, the source of this is our AFRINIC bylaws, which has several headings. So there's a heading giving you general information about the company, the organization. There is another heading dealing with our membership, who our members are, the category of members we have, their rights and powers. We have our community meetings, the type of meetings we have, how we constitute our board of directors, and incidental to that, we have the nomination committee as well as the election committee, and we do have a kind of what I call miscellaneous sections dealing with other information, providing other information about the companies, including standing companies or ad hoc standing committees or ad hoc committees that may be set up by the board from time to time. So let us start with who AFRINIC is. AFRINIC, the legal entity, AFRINIC, the company. As you may be aware, we are registered in Mauritius. AFRINIC is a company limited by guarantee. Unlike other companies, it is not a company limited by shares. So we do not have shareholders. We have guarantors. So it is a company limited by guarantee. It is that model, that structure that is normally attributed to non-governmental organizations, NGOs. So it is a special category of companies prescribed in our Companies Act here in Mauritius. And yeah, so we do not have shareholders. Very important to bear in mind, to emphasize on this at the very outset. We do not have shareholders, we have guarantors, and those guarantors are by default who we call the registered members of the organizations of AFRINIC, and who also happen to be the elected directors. So the directors of the company, once a person gets elected, so they become the board directors through a process of election. So once they are elected, they become the company's directors, who will also have they wear a second hat, or the registered members. So these individuals are the guarantors. So that's AFRINIC, the company. And we have AFRINIC, of course, in its capacity as the regional internet registry, the RIR. It's nothing new to you. AFRINIC is the 5th RIR in the world, established in 2005. We serve 55 economies in Africa, including the Indian Ocean, and we are a not-for-profit organization. We are here to serve the African internet community by delivering efficient services in a global multi-stakeholder environment. That's the AFRINIC, the RIR. So our principle, our main function as RIR, of course, is to ensure the proper and efficient administration of IP number resources. So how does an applicant become a member of AFRINIC, right? If you need IP resources, how do you go about it? So, and looking at the title, as you may see from the screen, it reads resource membership, because very often I observe that there is a confusion from certain quarters in our community, because when we talk about members, it needs to be very clear in our mind the type of membership we are talking about. An entity to which AFRINIC has allocated IP number resources, that entity would be our resource member, right? Because we have other type of members as well. My next slide will deal with those other categories of members, but for the timing, it's very important to bear in mind, when we talk about resource membership, we're talking about a legal entity to which AFRINIC has allocated IP resources. Now, how do you become a resource member? An application would be submitted to us, of course. There's a process, an administrative process for that. And there are three important criteria. First, the applicant must be a legal entity, that is not a human being. So it is a company. That company has a geographical presence in our region. That is, I mentioned about the 55 economies that we serve. And of course, the applicant needs to establish, to satisfy that they need these IP resources for their business. So it is done, the allocation is done on a needs basis. If we have the applicant coming as an entity, it has a geographical presence, but doesn't satisfy the needs basis, then of course, the application will not be successful. So very important, all these criteria need to be satisfied. Of course, it goes without saying, upon receipt of an application, my colleagues working at the Member Resources Department, when processing an application, they would do their normal due diligence, including verification of all documentation submitted to us. They may be contacting the issuers of all these certificates and documents, right, before being satisfied that we are dealing with a genuine application. Now, once the application is successful, the applicant would be offered to sign what we call a registration service agreement, often called the RSA, right? So there's a contract then that is signed between the applicant and AFRINIC. So the relationship, when we talk about resource membership, it is a contractual relationship existing between AFRINIC and that organization. So if you have questions, please, I repeat, be free to send it on the chat or the Q&A section. I will be pleased to deal with them as we go along. Membership, again, I mentioned earlier on, very important to bear in mind the types of members we have because of the confusion I often observed from coming from the community in general. I've talked about the resource members. The other two categories are the registered members and associate members. You may recall I mentioned at the beginning that AFRINIC being a company limited by guarantee, we have guarantors, not shareholders, and those guarantors are our elected directors who happen to wear a second hat also. So because AFRINIC is registered with the register of companies, so we have to provide details and particulars of our those guarantors who we call registered members in our context. Why registered members? Because those members are registered with the registrar of companies. So they are registered members. The difference between registered members and resource members at this stage is that you may observe that registered members, those directors, they are individuals, human beings. Resource members, as I mentioned earlier in my preceding slide, those are legal entities, right? That's an important difference to bear in mind. But then also we have associate members. Now, associate members, those are members, they can be individuals, legal entities, incorporated or unincorporated organizations, anyone who have an interest in internet or IP management. They can apply to become our associate members, and they will be asked to sign an associate member agreement. So again, their relationship with us is contractual. Now, talking about, since it is clear that these, when we talk about members, we have three types of members. Also equally important to bear in mind that the rights and powers are not the same. Registered members, they have the right, the full voting rights, to put it this way. They have full voting rights, full rights to participate in our meetings, as well as the resource members. But associate members, their rights are limited. They have the right to attend our annual meeting, but not to participate, kind of an effective participation, because they do not have voting rights. So that brings us then to our community meetings, where we'll talk quite in detail about the annual meetings. Community meetings, as prescribed in our bylaw, we have two types of community meetings, made up of annual members meeting, then called the AGM, and the public policy meetings. As the name suggests, the AGM is held annually. It is a meeting required to be held by the Companies Act, just like any private company would be holding their general meeting once a year. This is when the accounts would be submitted to the assembly. Auditors would be appointed. Resolutions would be discussed and resolved. So there is a standard agenda for that. The board, the AFRINIC board, would be the one to convene for the AGM, would be convening the AGM. And when that AGM is convened, we have in attendance the registered members, resource members, as I mentioned earlier on, also the associate members. And very interesting to bear in mind that this meeting is also broadcasted online. So even if somebody is not either a registered member, resource member, representative of a resource member, or an associate member, any member of the general internet community will still be allowed, or will still be able to follow the proceedings of this meeting online through the YouTube channel. And then, of course, we have the public policy meeting. I will come to that in a moment, but let us understand some basics about the AGM. As required by law, when the AGM is to be convened, there's a notice of meeting to be sent, which must be sent 21 days prior. Right. So all those who are eligible to receive the notice to attend the meeting, they will receive a notice of meeting. The notice will include the agenda, as well as all supporting documentations, including the audited accounts, any draft resolutions to be passed at that meeting, a resolution for the appointment of auditor. If there's an election to be held at that meeting, details of the election. The quorum for the AGM is 10 persons, 10 made up of 5 directors, that is, those 5 registered members, and 5 representatives of resource members. Why I say representative of resource members? Because remember what I've been mentioning since the beginning. Our resource members are legal entities which can only act through their representatives, and their representatives here would be their registered contacts, usually. unless somebody else has been properly designated by their respective organizations. Voting rights, I mentioned it early on, only registered members and resource members have voting rights. Why? Because associate members, they attend our AGMM in an observer capacity. And when it comes to passing of resolutions, if there's any tie, then the chairperson has a casting vote. So these are the basics for you to take stock of at this stage whenever we have our AGMM. Public policy meetings. The other most important meeting that we have in AFRINIC, it is held at least once a year, as required by the bylaw, but it has been customary that such meeting is held twice a year. It is attended by our internet community, right? So not only representative of our resource members or directors, registered members, associate members, anyone can attend our public policy meeting. We have an open door policy. So how do we determine who makes our internet community? It's very simple. You simply have to subscribe to our relevant mailing list, including the community mailing list or the RPD mailing list. So you subscribe to those mailing lists, you will be deemed to be part of our internet community. And so whenever public policy meetings will be held, you will be invited to participate in those meetings. So what happens in those meetings? These are the meetings where policies are discussed. What policies? We're talking here about policy relevant related to IP management. And this is what differs AFRINIC from any other companies which would normally run their normal meetings. Because AFRINIC, the RIR, and with the mandate of ensuring the proper administration of IP number resources. So how do we administer those IP resources? Those are administered by our colleagues in the relevant department through the policies which have been proposed. Yes, Debo, you have a question?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry for interrupting you. There's a question on, before you continue, there's a question on the Q&A, and I think you might want to answer the question. So Tedu asked that if you made mention that AFRINIC governed by the laws of Mauritius. So he said, how are these laws applicable to people from other countries?
Right, okay. So of course, since AFRINIC is incorporated in Mauritius, it is therefore governed by the laws of Mauritius. And here, since we're talking about our governance model, the most relevant law here is the Companies Act. And I'm sure in all countries, they have their respective domestic laws, including their own Companies Act. And I would not be surprised if the provisions that we have here in Mauritius in our Companies Act would be more or less the same. Though, like I said, each country is sovereign and they have their own parliament, they have their own domestic laws. So yes, our Companies Act here in Mauritius would not apply. It doesn't have what we call extraterritorial effect, so it doesn't apply to other countries. But since AFRINIC is governed here in Mauritius, this is why the relevant law is the Companies Act, which anyone having an interest in AFRINIC, as far as our governance model is concerned, you just have to Google our Companies Act. You can go through the relevant the provisions and see how we are governed. Does that answer the question, Debo?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it does. Yeah. So,
okay,
yeah, you can continue.
So please be free. If you have other questions, please be free to stop me. Okay. I'll be happy to deal with them as we go along. So yes. So coming back to public policy meetings, as I was saying, this is our role as an RIR. We are here to administer IP resources, and because of the bottom-up model, And that's what makes us an RIR, right? So it is not for the board. It is not the board of AFRINIC or the resource members themselves who decide how these resources will be determined. It is rather from the general community, right? So the proposals are made by the community. So policy, what we call policy proposals, are proposed. So there is a working group, what we call the PD, Policy Development Working Group, PDWG, which is managed by 2 persons, who we call, there are 2 co-chairs, who also happen to be volunteers from the community. They are appointed by the community, as they are selected by the community at the public policy meetings, whenever it is held. They serve a certain tenure as agreed by the community, and they are the one who receive policy proposals coming from the community. Now, talking about policy proposal, very important to bear in mind. If either you are already a member of our community, or if tomorrow you want to be part of this, of the system, of the process, bear in mind that if you intend to submit a policy proposal for discussion, you need to ensure that you satisfy what we call the admissibility test. The admissibility test is that the policy proposal, the proposal that you intend to submit, it must be a policy that is related to IP management. This is very clearly prescribed in our bylaw. If you look, our bylaw, a copy of which is easily accessible on the net, or if you go through our website, you will find a copy of our bylaw. There is the article 11.3 that talks about it. So it must be a policy that is related to IP management. Let me be clear and emphasize on this, because this is an observation I've made for some time now. Because if a policy that is submitted and it has nothing to do with IP management, then clearly it is not admissible in law. And any discussions that is held on the mailing list, or even at the public policy meetings whenever it is held, then it will be null and void, strictly legally speaking, right? So please make sure whenever you're submitting a policy proposal, first thing it must be a policy that is related to IP management. Now, that policy is submitted, assuming it satisfies the admissibility test. It is submitted on a mailing list. There will be discussions on the mailing list. Then further discussions will be held whenever that meeting is taking place. And at the end of that meeting, the co-chairs will determine whether there is what we call, in our jargon, a rough consensus over that policy. What we mean by rough consensus is that more or less all objections or issues raised with respect to those policies have been addressed. And this is how this policy development working group works. It works on the basis of consensus, right? And once rough consensus has been declared, there will be a process for some time, what we call the last call, in case there are any issues or minor issues raised, not substantive issues, but it could be editorial edits to be made to the proposal following discussions held during the meeting. And then the the co-chairs will make a declaration of what we call a final consensus. Once there has been final consensus concerning a policy, the co-chairs will then submit a report to the board of directors for ratification. So the policy only becomes effective and ready for implementation once it has been ratified by the board. Up and until then, it is only a policy proposal that has reached consensus. Okay, so very important, it only has legal effect once it has been ratified by the board. So the process is very simple. So it starts with a policy proposal submitted on a mailing list. Remember, I talked about the admissibility of the policy, discussed on the mailing list, further discussions held at the meeting. There is a declaration of rough consensus, followed by a period of last call, final consensus, then a report that goes to the board for ratification. It is only then that the policy becomes ready for implementation. So I mentioned earlier on how the working coaches are elected, or rather selected by the community at the policy meetings itself. And so now this brings us to the composition of the AFRINIC Board of Directors. Now, the AFRINIC board is composed of 9 directors. It's a board made up of 9 persons, including the CEO, who is appointed by the board, which means that if the CEO is appointed by the board, meaning that the CEO is the 9th director, so he's appointed by the other 8 persons. So the 8 persons, the 8 other persons rather, they are elected. They are elected at the annual general members meeting by the member base. Remember, I mentioned earlier on those with voting rights, that is the registered members and representatives of the resource members. They would be electing whenever there is a board vacancy that has come up for election. So each region, our service region is divided into 6 regions. So we have, if we start with the Indian Ocean, since we are incorporated here in Mauritius, so Indian Ocean is 1 region. We have North Africa, Southern Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and Central Africa. So each region has a representative that sits on the board. Okay, so each region is geographically represented. And then we have 2 seats which are reserved, and the selection is made on a non-regional basis, but rather based on their competencies. Why? Because we want to ensure that we have a diverse, well-diverse board of directors with individuals coming from different professional background, so that makes the board more effective. And all the elected directors, they are here to serve a term of 3 years, except for the CEO. Why? Because his tenure of office would be determined by the board, right? Subject to the contract that he or she may have with the board. It would be a contract for 1 year. If it's a contract for 1 year, his or her term would be for 1 year, or it could also be 2, 3 years, as may be agreed between the CEO, the relevant selected candidate rather, and the board. So that's the board composition. Of course, talking about when we talk about board, there will be subcommittees of the board. So presently, we have, as in any other private companies, you will have a finance committee, an audit committee. We have a remuneration committee. In other companies, they call it an HR committee, right? Or any other committee as the board may deem necessary and fit to set up. So now, how does the board operate? Board proceedings. Unlike the annual general members meeting, where the quorum is 10, the quorum for a board is 5. So we will have a quorate board once we have 5 persons attending the meeting, whether it is being held in person or virtually. Decisions are usually taken depending on what is on the nature of the decision to be taken, usually taken by way of ordinary resolution, that is where a simple majority is required. Otherwise, there may be circumstances where a special resolution will be required of the board, or if the board is not being able to meet either in person or virtually, but depending on the urgency of the matter, the board may also proceed by way of written resolution. And where a written resolution is being proposed, then that decision the board is required to ensure that at least 2/3 of those eligible to attend a board meeting provides the assent to that decision, to that proposed resolution. So I don't know if you've realized the difference is, if we go by way of a written resolution, so 2/3 of a properly constituted board would be, you need 6 persons agreeing over a proposed resolution. Unlike if you have a board, a co-read board, meeting either personally or virtually, then if we have 5 persons in attendance, the board is correct, good to proceed with its business, and applying the simple majority rule, 3 out of 5 voting in favor of a proposed resolution, then you have the resolution will be passed. So that's a very interesting distinction to bear in mind, especially whenever a board meeting is being held. So if it's being held in either in person, physically or virtually, 2 important points to bear in mind. Do we have a co-read board? Do we have the necessary, the requisite quorum? And that's how we apply the simple majority rule. Alternatively, if we're going by way of written resolution, how the rule differs from a normal physical meeting. Now, of course, I've mentioned earlier on about the AFRINIC, our mission. We are here to serve the African continent. It made up of a multi-stakeholder approach, and because we have to have an obligation to be transparent in our operations and all, so our minutes, the minutes of the board, as well as the minutes of our AGM, they are available. They are readily accessible on the AFRINIC website. The link, as you may see from the screen, it's there. You may go through the minutes. You may take stock of what is being proposed, what is being discussed, how decisions are being made, and how these decisions are in the interest of the organization, and by extension, of course, how it impacts the African continent, how it impacts the region. So that's about the board proceedings in a gist. And I mentioned earlier on also, incidental to the composition of our board meeting, we have a nomination committee and election committee, because that's how our board is usually constituted, through a process of election. And when I say usually, that means, of course, it goes without saying there's an exception, especially when, if, for example, a person on the board, one reason or another, resigns or has passed away, or who may have, following a vote of no confidence, has had to vacate his position, which means there is a creation of a casual vacancy. Then the board, the other members of the board would appoint. They have the right to appoint a director. So that's also an important distinction point to retain, is that though usually the board is constituted by way of an election, but there's an exception to that, where the board doesn't have to call for an election to fill a casual vacancy, so because it has the power to appoint, to fill that vacancy by way of appointment and not through election. Now, the nomination committee, who is in charge of organizing and supervising the whole election process, is a committee made up of 4 persons from the community. So if you're members of if you are members of our community, then that one day there may be an opportunity for you to even to find yourself on this committee, then what we call the nomination committee. It is appointed by the board, and the qualifications for appointment is that if, for example, let's say there is a vacancy for the southern region, the Southern Africa region, then if you come from that region, then you will not be qualified to be a member of the committee. Why? Because simply to avoid all form of perception of bias, right? But otherwise, if there's no conflict of interest, or there's no, if you satisfy all the relevant criteria which the board will set whenever it needs to reconstitute the nomination committee, there will be a call for interest. You simply have to, you may opt to participate in this process, and the board, you may end up being a member of our nomination committee. Why not? So since it is appointed by the board, the nomination committee has a reporting line to the board. But when I say report, though it has a reporting line, though it reports to the board, but then we have to be very careful, and there should not be any confusion about this. And I underline this. Why? Because the role of the nomination committee is, and the function, it functions in an independent manner, right? Though it is appointed by the board and it has a reporting line to the board, but nevertheless, it acts independently. Why independently? Because it is the nomination committee that makes the call for candidates for the board. It receives candidatures, potential candidates, those interested to become to stand as candidate for the board election. It is the same nomination committee that determines whether those interested individuals, they satisfy all the requirements of the law, that is the requirements prescribed by the Companies Act, as well as additional requirements prescribed in our bylaws in terms of who are eligible to stand as candidates for board elections. So they act independently. And once they have come up, they have determined who are the eligible candidates, right? Then the nomination committee will publish what we call a final slate of candidates. And it is those final slate, those individuals whose names will then end up on the ballot paper whenever the relevant elections are being held. Now, very important, again, to emphasize on this, because in terms of understanding the role of the nomination committee, the role is to find suitable candidates, not just candidates. There's a qualification here. The role of the NomCom is to find suitable candidates for election of the directors of AFRINIC, right? So you will have to, they will have to make sure that whoever, when processing all those interests that have been submitted, you'll have to ensure that they are able to find out what we call the blue-eyed individuals, right, who will be able to serve AFRINIC, who will be able to work in the best interest of AFRINIC, because once a person becomes directors, they will have statutory duties to abide with. Those duties have been prescribed in the Companies Act. So we have to ensure that whoever wants to become directors of AFRINIC, they are suitable, they are able, they are and competent, they are fit and proper individuals to assume the functions of directors of AFRINIC, so that they are able to operate and work in the best interest of AFRINIC. And when we talk about somebody working in the best interest of AFRINIC, we're talking about somebody working in the best for the best interest of AFRINIC service region, somebody who has the interest of working of ensuring the sustainability and existence of the RIR system. So this is what I mean by suitable candidates, right? It's not somebody who just want to find himself on a board of directors and wants to take it as a privilege to serve his own personal interest, right? It is the interest of the organization, of the region, that should prevail. So that's basically, it's a very important role and a high responsibility for the NomCom. And once they have found that those candidates are suitable to stand as candidate for the board elections, then it will ultimately be a matter for the membership, that is, the registered members and the resource members, representatives of resource members, to vote for who they want to be their representative, right? So it is a very, very interesting and important process, because that's at the end of the day, that's how we embed the democratic principles into AFRINIC. And of course, we have the election committee, Unlike the nomination committee, which is appointed by the board, the election committee is appointed by the CEO, right? And made up of staff members. And what they do, they're here to, they have a general responsibility for organizing all elections held by AFRINIC. And they're here to provide all the administrative and logistic support to the NOMCOM and ensure that the election is held accordingly. So collectively, to put it simply, both the nomination committee and the election committee has a general responsibility to ensure that the election that is being held by AFRINIC is free and fair, right? So that's why early on I was talking about, I mentioned that though the nomination committee is appointed by the board as prescribed in the bylaw, nevertheless, it has the responsibility to act independently, right? So this is very important to bear in mind. And then, of course, we have other standing committees. At AFRINIC, we have, we have the Council of Elders, right? There's a specific section in our bylaws that provides for a Council of Elders, and we also have a governance committee. The difference between these two is that the Council of Elders is appointed by the board and made up of a maximum of 6 former chairpersons of AFRINIC, right? And looking at the eligibility criteria for the membership of the COE, the Council of Elders itself, you understand that why former chairpersons, because of course, going by their experience, having served on the board of AFRINIC, having served as chairpersons of AFRINIC, so they have an advisory role, an important role to play. They're here to advise the board, not only the board, but also the chairperson of the AFRINIC board, right? And to advise on what, of course, based on their experience, they will be called upon from time to time to advise the board and or the chairperson of the board on governance matters, but there's no restriction or limitation as to what sort of advice they may be called upon to provide to the board, right? So that's the Council of Elders. The Governance Committee, unlike the Council of Elders, it is elected at the AGM, right? Made up of 7 members, 3 of whom are elected by the AFRINIC membership, that is at the AGM. 3 are appointed by the board. Looking at the slide, you will find that 2 are appointed by the board, and the third one, who is also appointed by the board, but he acts as a liaison, right? He doesn't have a voting right. So in effect, 5 members of the governance committee, 5 of them have voting powers. The board member the member who's appointed by the board and who acts as a liaison, he doesn't have a voting right. And these individuals are also supported by the AFRINIC legal advisor, who also doesn't have any voting powers. So that's the governance committee. But then, of course, there's no restriction to that, because the board, in terms of its general powers, may from time to time set up other ad hoc committees. For example, early on when we were talking about the public policy meeting, remember I mentioned about policy proposals, I mentioned about the policy development working group and all. So all the declarations made by the working groups, by the working groups co-chairs. So if somebody, let's say, feels aggrieved by a decision reached by the co-chairs, then that person is allowed to make an appeal against that decision, and that goes to an appeal committee, right? And at some point in time, my other colleagues will have the pleasure, will have the privilege to have other webinars which will focus and go into much detail on how the policy development working group works. But at this stage, at least I can mention the existence of the appeal committee because it is prescribed in those in the policy that has already been ratified by the board. Those policies, they form part of what we call the consolidated policy manual, which is also readily accessible on our website. So you just type consolidated policy manual and you find all the policies that have been ratified by the board. They have been consolidated there and published. So that's the appeal committee. So whoever feels aggrieved by a decision reached by the working chairs, they make an appeal to the appeal committee, who is empowered to review whether the co-chairs have followed all the due process before reaching that decision, whether consensus ought to have been declared or not. But then, of course, we, like I said earlier on, the board may set up any other ad hoc committees. It could be a recall committee, right? Which is also a committee that is prescribed in our consolidated policy manual, that is to recall co-chairs. Why? Because maybe they have not acted in the way that they should have, right? Could be for such grounds such as they have engaged in misconduct or not being able to deliver to the standard that is expected of them. So these are just examples of committees that may be set up by the board, or the board may also, in the past, the board has set up what we call the reform committee, right? So there's no exhaustive list, at least to put it this way, but there are committees that the board may set up from time to time for the interest of the organizations. So that would be it. That would be it. I hope you have had a brief, you have acquired at least a basic understanding of how the AFRINIC governance model is made up. So we have, I have covered several headings of our bylaws. I've talked about AFRINIC, the company, AFRINIC, the RIR, our main functions as RIR in terms of ensuring the proper administration of IP number resources, how we administer these resources. I mentioned about policies that are proposed, discussed. The whole process is done on a consensus basis, which is subsequently ratified by the board before they may be implemented. I've talked about how we constitute our board directors. And I have also talked about the categories of members we have: registered members, resource members, associate members, the contractual relationship that AFRINIC has with its resource members and associate members, how the elected directors and the registered members happen to be the same persons for the purpose of regulatory compliance under the Companies Act. Also, I've talked about the committees that we have at AFRINIC: nomination committee, election committee, the council of elders, governance committee. I also mentioned about the appeal committee, reform committee, or any such other ad hoc committee that the board may set up from time to time. So here we are. So now, if you have any questions or comment, please be free to put your questions, and I'll be happy to attend to those. Debo, over to you.
So thank you very much, Krishna. That was very nice presentation, and also packed with a lot of knowledge for mostly the beginners and those who are already existing in the system. So I will encourage anyone who encourage us to drop in the questions. If you have any question, the chat is open, and also you can use the Q&A module to ask your questions, so we can then expatiate on it.
No questions means everyone have actually understood, have already acquired a good understanding of our governance model. Philip, I see, is saying great presentation. Thank you, Philip.
Okay. Would you want to take that from Rachid?
Okay, there is a question from Rashid asking, what are the advantage of being a member? Now, I presume Rashid is saying, what are the advantages of being a resource member? Maybe Rashid could qualify, but is he referring to a resource member? Okay, I presume that that's what Rashid means. Yes, resource member. So as a resource member, of course, the first advantage is that you will be allocated IP resources, which will then enable you to run your business, your network. The other advantage is that you will be able to participate in all our events. You will have the right to attend our annual general members meeting. You will have voting rights. You will be able to, as representative of your organization, you will be able to determine how decisions are taken with respect to IP resources, because there's no IP connection, internet connection without an IP, right? So you will have a major role to play, right? You will have a major role to play in terms of digitalizing the African continent. It's very important. It's a privilege for you to be there. That's why it's very important for you to be members of our community, because that's how that's the bottom-up approach. That's the bottom-up model. Okay, so you the members, representative of the resource members, coming together, determining how they're going to self-regulate the management of IP resources. Because remember, it is not, we don't operate by way of the top model, top-bottom model. It is the bottom-up model. It is not the board of AFRINIC that decides how resources must be utilized. It is the community coming together through policy proposals and decide how these resources must be utilized, which is subsequently ratified by the board and then implemented through our colleagues, right? So it is, there are advantages. There are other advantages, of course, incidental to that. You'll be able to you will be informed and kept up to date about all the relevant AFRINIC events. We have a specific department providing technical training, right, capacity building, providing technical training to resource members as well as the community in general, right? There are lots of advantage. So if you want to have more details, please be free to contact our colleagues at AFRINIC, who will be able to provide you with more specific details in terms of who to contact, what specific advantages that are provided that are open there, as well as what trainings are being organized and where they will be held and when they will be held.
Okay, thank you for that. I can see Nicholas and Op. We actually only have about 5 minutes to end the session, but Nicholas, I'm going to give you the floor soon for you to ask your question. Nicola? Okay, in the absence of that, thank you very much, Kisna. We thank you very much for this session. And well, like you mentioned, we already shared the recording on on the YouTube, which you can check it on your webinar chats. If you go through, you see the recording there. And also, I would like to make a few announcements. We are running a survey link that will be posted. Oh, okay, there's a question.
See, there's a question from Timothy, maybe?
Yeah, Timothy. And
right, Timothy is asking, is the current
yeah.
composition of the board form the required quorum? No, unfortunately, no. Presently, as you may be aware, AFRINIC, it's been for a while now that we do not have a quorum board. So yet still we do have directors. We have 4 directors presently, but unfortunately they don't constitute a quorum board.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for that, Krishna. So this has come to an end of the program today. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Also, we just shared the survey link, which will be posted on the chat section. It would be nice to have a rating from you. Please spare a minute or two to complete the survey. And also, our next webinar will be Introduction to AFRINIC Policy Development Process. That's 8th of June, 8th of next month, that's June. So the topic is mostly about the policy development process, which is based on the bottom-up multi-stakeholder approach and is used to develop resource management policies. The goal of this webinar is to give an overview of AFRINIC policy development process, the key stakeholders and their roles, steps on resource policy follows, and how consensus is being reached. So it is expected that by the end of this webinar, the participants will have a comprehensive understanding of the processes and dynamics involved in shaping internet policy within AFRINIC. So we appreciate that we go ahead and register for this upcoming webinar, which is on 8th of June. So we can then bring in so we can just come in to understand the whole policy development process. So thank you very much, everyone, once again. This will be to the end of the program. See you next time. Bye.